Well, it's starting to look like a three-way tie for second place. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the latest polling is showing that Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden are in a virtual dead heat at about 20% each in recent polling as far as their candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president. And I think I know what your position is on this as far as, whether you think any of them can beat President Trump. We've covered that ground before. What I'd like to do in this episode of Bill Whittle Now is do a little kind of analysis of each candidate, strengths and weaknesses, sort of a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, without really going too deeply into the question of, could this person beat Donald Trump? Because, again, I think I know how you feel about that. And so let me just start with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, in some ways, has President Trump's populism in the sense that he's trying to appeal to every man and just trying to basically say that your government doesn't care about you, and I do. Tell me about what you see as Bernie Sanders' strengths and weaknesses.
We'll do the whole SWOT. His strengths is his strongest asset is that he has been the one who's been longest promising to give stuff to people for free. He's marked out the territory. If I'm going to take stuff from them, elect me. I'll take stuff from those people and give it to you. So Bernie's strength, I think, is that he is he is considered, I think, by most progressive voters to be the guy who made socialism respectable. I think his weakness is, first of all, I think if Bernie never had a chance and he doesn't have a chance, but certainly 2016 was his year. I don't see 2020 being anything like the kind of match that it was when Bernie Sanders was fighting Hillary Clinton for the nomination.
And I think you're doing this, but I also want to clarify just before we get into the other ones as well. We're basically talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for getting the Democratic nomination. So, but you're already headed down that path. I just want to make sure that
I'm just saying for the nomination, as time has passed, I think he looks old. He was old. He was old during the Civil War. But Bernie is an old man, and he looks it. In addition to his weaknesses, he is extremely unpresidential looking and acting. He looks like a college professor, and a unkempt one at that. And I think his biggest weakness is, while he may still engender a fair amount of enthusiasm from young voters who like the idea of getting all this stuff for free right at the beginning of life, I simply can't imagine really any significant numbers of people voting for a guy who is that just unpleasant. He's just an unpleasant guy.
He does have a certain authenticity benefit, doesn't he, Bill? Even if you see him as a surly, grumpy old man, he's kind of, you think he really is that way. It's not an act, and he's being himself.
No, it's not
and
an act.
Authenticity counts for a lot these days.
Look, I think Bernie's authenticity comes from the fact that he's at least he was the only person out there saying that capitalism is evil, and that appeals to a certain age group of people who haven't had the stupid beaten out of them yet by enough time on Earth. So he has the kind of the cachet of being the original guy, but I just don't see him as a serious contender this year, or much of a spoiler either, to be honest with you.
Do you think he brought up that capitalism is evil idea at all three of the closings for his real estate acquisitions?
I think he was probably thinking as he signed all three of the deeds for his three houses that this millionaire owns. I suspect he put that about as far out of his mind as he possibly could. I know I've asked Bernie supporters about the fact that this guy who says that people with more than one house are just inherently evil. How do you explain Bernie's three houses? And I had one student said, well, but he earns it. He deserves it. He's doing important work. Okay. Anyway, so I don't think Bernie's much of an issue.
Okay, let's take Joe Biden next.
Sure.
And obviously, in Joe Biden, you do have kind of a almost Donald Trumpian sort of everyman character. Good old Uncle Joe, as some people refer to him as, and also, and let me give him full credibility here. Former Vice President of the United States, former U.S. Senator, certainly has experience, probably as much experience, if not more, than anybody else running for the office, and yet almost a Trumpian sort of proclivity for saying things that people don't want him to say. The latest headline, by the way, I saw, and I'm picking this out of a publication called The Week. We used to call them publications when they were on paper. Under the headline, Joe Biden, I want to be clear, I'm not going nuts. Bill, so you've got this sort of credibility on the one side, and then the growing sense that when you have a candidate who has to tell you he's not going nuts, you may have an issue. So how do you weigh his strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for a Democratic nomination?
Well, Joe Biden's great strength is that he's the default candidate. He's now the elder statesman of the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton's out of the picture. Barack Obama's out of the picture. In fact, both Clintons are out of the picture. So it really does come down to Biden being kind of the de facto eminence, Greece, and heir apparent. That's probably 4 foreign words in one sentence, which I shouldn't do. But you get the idea. He's the safe vote, and he's also, to some degree, I think he's also the sane vote, although that's really saying something. He's certainly perceived as the establishment guy. He's certainly perceived as the kind of what the Democratic Party has always stood for kind of guy. He's got a good appeal for working people. He can definitely project that sense that he was one of them 60 years ago or whatever. But when you say that Joe Biden, like Donald Trump, says things that other people don't like, the difference is that Joe Biden doesn't do it on purpose. Joe Biden just says dumb things because Joe Biden's not a real smart guy. And Trump says things that I think are intentionally designed to inflame people and get a reaction out of them. I don't think there's any question that he doesn't have. Well, if you want to just talk about the primaries and the Democratic nomination,
yeah,
I knew his standings were going to fall. He started out 30 points ahead of anybody else, and I knew that as the field started to narrow, and it is narrowing rapidly, even though there's technically speaking still 20 people or something, we already know it's down to 5, maybe 5 or 6. And as those numbers continue to winnow down, his lead is going to winnow down, and so he represents, like I said, he represents the easy vote for Democrats, the vote for continuity of the Obama era, and so on. Those are his strengths. His weaknesses are legion. His biggest weakness in the age of identity politics foisted on us by the progressives in the Democratic Party is that he doesn't get to check any of the boxes at all, none. He's not a communist. He's not black. He's not a female. He's not gay, and all of these things mean that he is the enemy that the Democratic Party has been so careful to paint during the last almost 12 years now, certainly the last 10 or 11 years, that white, straight, male, heterosexual, white, straight, male, Christian, European descent is the abomination of America and what needs to be destroyed. So,
well, yes, all that's true, Bill. However, he was vice president of the United States to the first black president of the United States. In addition, he's the one who's often credited, although even this is considered a gaffe, with pressuring President Obama to coming out, so to speak, in favor of gay marriage or dropping his opposition to it in any case.
But these are head arguments. Now, people don't vote with their head. They vote with their hearts. They don't vote based on what they think. They vote based on how they feel. And all of these things are true about Joe Biden. But for the majority of the young people who are going to carry the social justice warrior torch and who will probably swing the election one way or another, none of those things are even on the record. They don't read. They're not aware of it. They don't much care about history. They look at Joe Biden. They see an incredibly old, maybe the whitest guy in the world. And that's what they see. They see an old white male. And to me...
with a $5,000 smile.
With a $5,000 smile, yes, but it's coming from the wrong face, and this is the corner that the Democrats have painted themselves into, which is why I'm so optimistic about next year. So Biden's obvious weaknesses are his ethnicity, his gender, his sexual preference, all of which are the things that appeal to what's left of the former Democratic Party, but all of which make him, I think, the least likely candidate for the young social justice progressive supporters. So this is the same old story about the Democrats being split right down the middle, and I don't think you can have it both ways. So I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee either.
And let me just ask one final question about Joe Biden, because his you rightly point out that his main attribute has been essentially his electability, so-called. What happens to that when he's tied 20-20-20 with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren?
Well, it's still so far out, Scott, and we learned from polling, if we learn one thing from 2016, that polling is a way for people to tell us what our opinion should be. But with that said, I think his numbers have fallen. I don't think they're going to come back. I can't imagine how they would come back. And I have to tell you, based on a couple of things I saw since Donald Trump was elected, but most especially during his campaign kickoff speech, I really do believe that Joe Biden is slipping significantly. I really do. I think Joe Biden is really losing a lot of mental acuity, and I have somebody in my family like that, and somebody I care a lot about, and it doesn't go away, and it accelerates. And if Biden, is already on the stump of well over a year before the election, let's say 5 quarters ahead of the election, almost 6 quarters ahead of the election, if he's already telling people, hey, I'm not crazy and I'm not senile, this isn't going to get better for him. So I don't think he's going to be the nominee.
So the first I remember hearing about Elizabeth Warren, she was being appointed to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was a new agency created during the Obama administration. And then she's a senator of the United States, so she's got some credibility there, or at least some titular authority, as they call it. She has, I think she brings together a couple of things. Obviously, a big focus on policy and government reform. So in that sense, she's Trump-like, not so much in what Trump campaigned on, but in what Trump has actually done to reform the process of governance with his court appointments, with his reduction of regulations, with his changing of the tax code, with, a lot of sort of real policy stuff that's happening in the Trump administration that he doesn't often get credit for. And yet, despite her policy chops, she has all the charm of Hillary Clinton. So how do you think Elizabeth Warren stacks up as a potential Democratic nominee?
Of the three, if these were the three potential candidates, and I'm not sure it's going to be either one of these three, but of the three, she's the one I would worry about the most.
Why so?
Well, she's intelligent. She's well-spoken. She's just oozes liberal. And she checks off all of the boxes needed for identity politics. So that's a big plus. And she is very, I actually don't think she's that smart, but she certainly sounds like she is. And there's a big difference between those two.
She was a college professor.
Yeah, there you go. So so she's an intellectual, and that appeals to the left. And that's why Adlai Stevenson got trounced, was it 3 times? Twice, certainly, by Eisenhower, because liberals think that people like college professors. And since
they liked Barack Obama and they liked Woodrow Wilson.
And you've already just completed half of the litany of catastrophe presidents, since the Civil War. So if you want to go for the other two, you go right for it. But yes, the problem with Elizabeth Warren is that, first of all, I don't think this Pocahontas thing is any fresh news, and I don't think it's going to stop people. I don't think there are any conservatives who were thinking about voting for Elizabeth Warren who won't because of the lying on her admission forms thing. And likewise, I don't
any
think there are
Democrats
any
for that matter.
Yes, and likewise, I don't think there are any Democrats who are not going to vote for her because of that either. But it does go to a fundamental problem with this person, and that is that she does not appear to be fully truthful, and and she's exhibited some extremely poor judgment. When she doubled down on the Indian thing and said, "Oh, I'm one 1600th Indian," that's just insane. I think her biggest weakness is she has absolutely no financial experience that I can see, and I think that Donald Trump.
Well, she ran the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Well, she should have been running the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but that doesn't matter either. She has no experience managing an economy in the way that a governor does, and that's why governors are the most serious candidates for the presidency and why they tend to be the most successful candidates, because essentially running a state is running the country in miniature. And she's got no financial experience whatsoever. Neither does Bernie, and neither does Joe. So this is the kind of thing where I think she's got a good chance. I think if I had to pick out of the three, I would say that she won. There's no question, Scott, that she's got the heat right now. There's large numbers of people coming to her events. And
crowd of 15,000 came out to see her in Seattle recently, I believe.
Yep. That's a big number, and
you've used that in the past as a metric, because you remarked during President Trump's campaign that how he was drawing huge crowds.
I'm not trying to deny it, and I'm not trying to pretend it's not a factor. She is hot now. I kind of think she's peaking early, if you really want to know. And 15,000 people is an impressive number, but 15,000 people in Seattle doesn't worry me as much as 15,000 people in Pittsburgh or
Madison,
Indianapolis. Those numbers would concern me quite a bit. So of those three, I think she's the biggest threat. I don't think she's the biggest threat in the field. I think the two biggest threats in terms of overturning Donald Trump's presidency, I don't think either of those people were mentioned in the three that you mentioned.
With Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, I could see either one of them in a debate with Donald Trump being able to kind of resort just to their natural zaniness. And, obviously Sanders would get off a bunch of zinging one-liners or gruff-sounding blunt things, and Joe Biden would try to charm people. But Elizabeth Warren, it seems to me, is no pushover. And I think that she might pose probably the biggest challenge of those three anyway in a face-to-face confrontation with Donald Trump.
I completely agree. And if Bernie Sanders thinks that he's going to just score on Donald Trump with Donald Trump not doing anything except lowering his head in shame and retiring to his podium, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have another thing coming. I don't think either one of those guys are even close to being as quick on their feet as Donald Trump is. I don't think they're even in the ballpark. I suspect that Elizabeth Warren, by temperament and by just plain cleverness, wouldn't go that route. She wouldn't take the Trump bait. She would try to stay above Trump on every level, I think, and I think that would be the smart play for her. But I think her big weakness is lack of any kind of economic credit. Unless there's an incredible meltdown, and even if there is, we had 3 years of really quite spectacular economic growth and potential rebuilding of the courts and the military. So Donald Trump's got a lot to run on. And Elizabeth Warren doesn't have anything other than the fact that she sounds like a feminist professor and appeals to people who think that the country would be well suited to be run by a feminism professor. I don't think that the majority of the American people believe that. And I think that she has, when you said she has all the charm of Hillary Clinton, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Nobody is as charming as Hillary Clinton is. Nobody. So I don't think she's as unliked as Hillary Clinton, but I don't think she has the gravity. I mean, Hillary Clinton could come in saying Secretary of State. She could come in with 8 years watching the president do his job, and So I don't see her as a force. Hillary was a force. There are people who've been supporting Hillary Clinton for 30 years or longer, and been saying this woman's going to be the next president. She's going to be the first woman president. Been saying that about Hillary Clinton all the time. Those people will naturally enough move to Elizabeth Warren, but they won't have the same kind of she deserves it the way that they feel like Hillary deserved it. I think Hillary deserves something too, but so far I haven't seen much evidence of her getting it, except in a karmic sense. And in that particular case, I don't know how the situation could be improved upon.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, another Democratic debate coming up very soon. And after that, maybe we do this show again in 6 weeks, and there are 3 different candidates. We'll see. But as the situation on the ground changes, Bill Whittle Now will be here 5 days a week to analyze what's happening and to look forward to that November 2020 night and to see how that's shaping up. We're glad for the people who have funded this enterprise and made it possible for us to bring these conversations not only to them, the people who are actually paying the money to finance these, but also to people all around the world and across the United States of America who may not yet have the ability to fund it or aren't aware that they could do it. And if you're one of those, let me just tell you, you can. Yes, you can. You can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.